Oh, hi there. It's the High Yield Podcast. No, really, it is. We're back. It's been a year or two. It's been 2 years. I've finally convinced Ravi that it's time to release more podcast episodes. He's been a thorn in my side. He's been really hampering my passion, but we've got it back together and I've finally convinced him. So all complaints about delays in the release of this podcast should be directed at Ravi Fear Dragon Parikh, care of America somewhere, feardragon64 at gmail.com. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I was finally pulled back into Starcraft after that long 2-year hiatus. Oh no, I'm sorry. Wait, that was you, Troy.
You're pretty busy, right? Because I heard you were pretty busy with some net neutrality stuff over the past few months, but you finally got fired and you've come back.
I have a complaint.
SCV ready. What's going on?
Here with StarCraft discussions worth their weight in gold, it's the High Yield Podcast with your hosts Troy Pavlik and Fear Dragon.
Say, you got a real pretty mouth.
Today on the High Yield Podcast, we're going to be talking about the infatuation the StarCraft community seems to have with improvement and deliberate practice and regimented build orders, and perhaps some of the negative implications that might be associated with that, but aren't really talked about too often. We've got some great guests on today, so I'll go around the horn and introduce themselves. I'll start. My name's Troy Pavlik. I'm a diamond level Terran player, so that puts me at the top 25% of players who should just make some more goddamn workers and focus on their macro, and they'd be master levels tomorrow. What am I, an idiot? There's also my co-host, Ravi Fear Dragon Parikh. He's just coming off a stint of several days with non-stop StarCraft content each day. How are you doing today, Fear Dragon?
Dude, I'm doing great. For some reason, whenever I cast StarCraft, I actually just want to do more StarCraft. But when I don't cast StarCraft, I don't really care if I'm not doing StarCraft. So this is a good chain for me.
So I've been following you on Twitter, unfortunately, for quite a while. I've got a question. So you perform DT base trades on ladder instead of actually having fun with the game and getting promoted. Why is that?
Oh man. Well, first of all, I learned this past weekend that what I thought was just a meme is actually a legitimate thing that's a pro player is doing. So I feel a lot better about that. But yeah, it's I actually just wait until my opponent moves out. And then I run in with anywhere between 10 to 25 Dark Templar, blink on them and force a base trade by killing all their command centers and detection. And then I win.
That disgusts me, just intrinsically. We've also got Maynarde. He's a caster who can bring the hype, but seems unable to hype himself up to do promotion drills for hours a day and actually earn that next promotion. Maynarde, how are you doing today?
I got promoted yesterday, but thank you.
Well, fucking killed my joke, Maynarde.
Can you do your preparation work, Troy?
Yeah, nice prep work, man. Look, good to see you put as much work into this as we do.
Pig, he's also joining us on the podcast, and he's actually good at the game. So I'm not sure why he's here. I thought the whole point of this podcast was sour grapes from bad players. But Pig, nice to have you on the podcast. How are you doing today?
You know, it's a pleasure to be here. It's 40 degrees Celsius, which is like, I don't know, about 100 Fahrenheit for all you crazy Freedom unit users out there. So
we can just use real units on the podcast.
Good, we can stick to that, you know. I'm sitting here in my underwear right now with a fan directed straight at me, and I'm ready to talk about some StarCraft because this is actually a topic I'm keen on, man. I've been playing a lot lately. I've been enjoying the game. I've been doing a lot of kind of refocusing on new players as well since we've had this big influx of free to play players. So I've been kind of like starting to see the game in a few different ways. So I've got a lot to talk about today.
That's actually an interesting point that I wanted to touch on quickly because you've seen some of the biggest sort of pickup in stream growth with the free-to-play, and Blizzard promoted you in the launcher and all that fun stuff. So you get sort of firsthand interaction with the new free-to-play players who are learning. How have you sort of interacted with those players, and how do you guide the people who are new to the game, and what do you tell them to do to get into the game?
It's kind of interesting because it's so hard to get past the StarCraft elitism, right? Where it's such a deep game, and you can climb up one little plateau in skill, and suddenly you see the game entirely differently to how you did when you were, you know, a couple hundred MMR lower on the ladder. So it's always a challenge to kind of like deconstruct the way you see the game as someone who's played nonstop since the game came out 7 years ago, and then try and share some of your knowledge and give some direction to guys who are literally just hopping in. And it's the same as when I play a new game for the first time, and half of it is just flashy colors and things. I don't really identify or discern half of what's on the screen. And it's a real challenge, I think, to actually go back and say, I'm going to try and explain something without using jargon. I'm going to like try and explain something in a simple way. Like let's try and actually explain this the way I'd explain this to my if I randomly got my mom to play StarCraft and somehow convinced that to happen. And it's really hard because there's so many levels in between as well, where you can always talk about a lot of different ways of embracing the game. For me personally, I think a big thing is trying to help give people as much direction as they want to seek out. As long as there's a lot of resources out there to improve on different areas, but mostly pointing out that like, hey, here's like a basic guide to help you have a bit of an idea of what you should be doing in your opening. Here's a few of the main things you should be focusing on. But the biggest thing I've been trying to remind people of is don't just tell new players, oh, just go macro. You just need to spend your money. You just need to spend your money. Like all experienced StarCraft players, whether they're in Platinum League or Grandmaster or pro gamers, have this like kind of terrible habit of just oversimplifying the game. And when you're a new player, there are so many things you can improve at, simply from just learning what all the different units do, trying out different crazy strategies that appeal to you. And you don't need to just spend your money to get better. So for me, it's been, even when I still follow the same sort of format that most people do. Hey, let's try and teach people how to macro better, how to spend their money, how to like move their units properly. But it's always with like the kind of vein in the back of my head saying, but remind them that they've got to just enjoy playing the game. Just have fun, try out things that look cool. People are always like, hey, what race should I play? I'm a beginner. What race? I'm like, just choose the one that you think looks coolest. And that's something which I'm really big on now is, yeah, you can improve and be as technically minded as you want, but you should always just draw on your own inspiration and kind of like have fun with what appeals to you as a player. So you can learn how to spend your money and build more workers each game. But at the same time, you can be exploring so many different things. You don't need to restrict yourself. So I think giving yourself some goals and focus is like, it's like the first step to helping you improve, but it doesn't need to push all the fun and creativity out of the game.
And that's the podcast. Good night, everyone.
I was going to say, like, that's pretty much hitting on pretty much what we want to talk about today. But I wanted to ask you about something that you just said, which is, it sounds like there's this sort of mix between you're focusing on the fun and you're using that as a tool to improve. Do you feel like that's more accurate of kind of the approach that you take to it, as opposed to what I think a lot of people say, and maybe the reason why there's that simplified logic of, oh, just get better at macro, which is just focus on getting better as opposed to focus on having fun, which will inherently allow you to find ways to improve.
Exactly. I mean, if you're not having fun, what's going to motivate you to keep playing? Exactly, right? So this is the thing is, there's these concepts in StarCraft which are hard to understand, and you can explain it in the most crystal clear way where there is no room for you to have any ambiguity. Think about Jack Attacks the Staircase, right? It's like a way of improving where you just kind of like just build workers and just build Marines, and like you really like break the game into these steps. But I think for a lot of players, even though this is like a crystal clear way to improve, and if you follow it, you will get better and you'll learn how to spend your money better, and you'll learn how to focus on one area at a time. I think most people will get bored a few steps into these sort of ways of learning. So I think if you tell your friend, just macro, just build workers, I often have people coming back and saying, hey, my friend said just to build workers, just to macro. I did that. And I look at this replay and I'm like, Jesus, you're not doing anything except building workers and spending your money. Like, you're not controlling your army. You're not looking around the map. You're clearly not having fun with it as well. So I think there's a lot too much advice out there where people just kind of try to push people out of just exploring the game on their own. And I don't know about you guys, but as someone who grew up playing RTS games, as a kid, was I sitting there like, oh, I'm looking up guides on how to get better at Warcraft 2? No. I was like, you know what would be really cool? If I build like these towers just outside their base, and then I build some more towers a little bit closer, and then I have a ballista, and I can siege them from afar. And it would seem like the coolest thing ever, and I'd figure it out as I go, and it was kind of terrible in terms of competitive execution. But, it was that fun, creative space for me to figure things out for myself. And that's one of the best parts of strategy games. So whenever you're improving, you've got to remember that as like the key focus. Have fun and be creative.
I used to play a lot of StarCraft, mainly with this focus of improving, but honestly, I've never actually been very good at improving. I have been in Diamond League quite literally my entire StarCraft career. There have been points where I dipped out of Diamond League because of MMR decay, and I would just naturally fall into like Gold League or something. And then it was just because I wasn't playing very actively. I had sort of lost a lot of my motivation to play and improve And it really wasn't until I just started learning to, I guess, take a very different approach to it. I mentioned the kind of like Dark Templar base trading style that I do now. But honestly, it's just been a big sort of tactic for me to work on my mechanics, to work on the other fundamental things, which sounds ridiculous because I'm warping in 12 Dark Templar at a time. Money kind of spends itself at that point, but it's still a really, really nice way for me to work on other things that are basic mechanics while I am having a bit more fun. And I also get just sort of more fun victories. I'm actually really okay a lot of the time, even when I'm losing, because I'm still doing things that give me some sort of sense of satisfaction when I'm playing. And I think that was what I was missing a lot of the time when I was seeking out improvement, is that unless I had really specific goals that I was targeting and trying to hit, I would actually be really, really frustrated by my losses. And this is actually why I think Maynard is going to have a really interesting perspective, because I know that your approach, it's more focused on improvement as opposed to my focus, which is to hell with normal play. I'm just going to do whatever I want. But I know you actually took a much more focused approach to actually improving at the game with focus goals that are independent of actually winning.
Yeah, I did, and I do. And but the reason I did these things was not only just because I wanted to have a different product and didn't want to just be a webcam of just some guy laddering without anything special about it, because there's a lot of those streams and I wanted to stand out a little bit when I started streaming earlier this year. But I honestly, I went through focus goals and this sort of thing because it felt like, to me, the biggest problem for a lot of people is ladder anxiety or just being afraid of the game. And this sort of thing, tracking whether you can do a thing like a deliberate practice, one of the things is, it is deliberate practice, but you're deliberately practicing one thing at a time. So it's compartmentalizing it. It's making it, if you concentrate very, very hard, emphasizing the word focus in focus goals, which is what I call these things, then the fact that you win or lose, I'm sure if you lose 20 games in a row, it's going to sting, but in the end of the day, you could look at your tally sheet of how many games did I get supply blocked in a row, how many, I lost 20 games, but I didn't get supply blocked for 10 of them, so clearly I have something else that I need to work on. And then you look through your replays, find out what it is, and have that as your next focus when you're playing. And for me personally, and I get a lot of testimonials as well of people that are, fans of the stream, subscribers, followers, just people in my Discord, just random gents on Twitter or whatever social media where they can reach me, even in person sometimes. People come up to me and say, hey, I really, really love that focus goal stream. It's gotten me back into StarCraft. It's got me back onto the ladder grind, and it's really, really uplifting to finally feel free of whether or not the color of my league border around my portrait is what I want. All of a sudden, it doesn't matter anymore. I tell people, close your MMR screen at the end of the game. Hit escape as soon as the game ends. Don't worry about your MMR. Go back to just playing games. But I agree with Pig, though. Completely agree with Pig that the first step in this sort of waterfall diagram that I have in my brain of how to improve at StarCraft is to enjoy the game first. And you can't just jump on the improvement focus goal train without actually enjoying the game. Find the race that you like, find the units that you like, find compositions that you like. Look at games of StarCraft and go, hey, was that cool? Did I like that? Do I want to be that guy? Do I want to have that unit composition and try and fight that kind of army? That looks really fun. Do I like Terran late game? Do I like Zerg late game based on these games that I've seen? Do I want to try and do that myself? And then I go, okay, well then we can have a conversation. We can try and figure out some things for you. But, I completely agree that you need to find something cool that you like first before you even attempt to start grinding in a sort of, deliberate practice sort of regime.
I actually really agree with pretty much everything you're saying, Maynard. One of the things that I found really interesting, though, and I actually have a pretty big theory on that I've thought a lot about, is where exactly that mentality oftentimes comes from. Because I've seen a lot of the other esports scenes, like you look at fighting games, you look at actually even Brood War, you look at a lot of like first person shooters, you look at a lot of MOBAs. There is this degree where people do want to like research the game and kind of learn things. But I actually feel that as esports as a whole has grown, and specifically, I would say the persona of StarCraft itself heavily revolves around esports. I think that it's very difficult for most people outside of the StarCraft scene to detach the esports side of StarCraft from their perception of what is StarCraft. And I think because of that, a lot of people are constantly thinking that their judgment of what a StarCraft game should look like is oftentimes heavily based around this is what a pro player plays at like. So when they get started, I think that there's so many things that they initially see that they feel like they have to do perfectly. And I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience or like had these friends before who were interested in StarCraft. They get started and then they just play versus the AI hundreds of times. Like, I'm not just saying like they play 1 or 2 games to kind of figure out how the game works. They play for weeks, maybe even sometimes. I actually have had a friend that did not want to play versus another real person for almost 2.5 to 3 months because they had this crippling fear that they weren't going to do everything perfectly, that they weren't going to like play the game properly. And I think a lot of that is just because people have this built-in perception from, I guess, the persona that StarCraft has built through esports. That's how you kind of have to play. You can't really get started until you hit that level. And I feel like the first step we need to do is to find a way to break down that sort of mentality that people have.
I know people like that too, Ravi. I actually have a close friend of mine like that it lives in my same town who's just been trying to get into StarCraft because it's gone free to play and he just wants another PC game. He's an Overwatch player basically. And he's like, I want to play a different PC game. I really hate Overwatch at the moment. The ladder's terrible. But he's also one of those guys that only cares about optimal shit. Like he only cares about the optimal way, about doing the right thing, playing the game the right way. And that's what he prioritizes. You know what I mean? Like, he's like, I need to learn how to play this game properly, but I don't want to hit the ladder until I know what I'm doing, which is, to me, it's a catch-22. You're not going to get to learn what you need to learn from just watching streams and playing the AI. You need to know what it feels like to play a person.
Yeah, it creates this like real barrier where you're just like, well, I got really good at like maxing out in 9 minutes every game. And yeah, that one Reaper comes in, or like, there's a little Zergling run by and you're like, well, the AI never does this to you because the AI doesn't do a lot of things. And it's also just not that exciting and fun. And the thing is, like, this is one of the big things, right? Is I remember it was, I used to be a big, I think, person who was guilty of just being like, well, this is the better way to play. Well, this is the right way to play. And since I've, retired from being a pro player and spend more time trying to have fun with the game and discovering the fun, because I'm not playing to earn my money anymore, right? I'm a streamer, I'm an entertainer now. So it's more about, hey, can I have a good time and spread that good time to my viewers? And more, I'm just like, I remember TLO made a post a couple of years back being like, guys, can we stop telling new players they have to do X or they got to do Y? Like, there are so many things you can do in this game that are so cool. Like, stop telling people they can't do things. And that's something which I'm really big on now, is like, people are like, oh, is this better or is this? Or is this or this? And I'm always like, guys, it's a strategy game. You can do literally anything in this game and make it work.
Yeah.
When I started cheesing people, and it steadily developed into, a segment of my stream where it's not even cheese anymore. It's just, I just do different things, which I often come up with on the fly. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to try and like burrow banelings all over the map this game. Or I'm going to try and I'm going to proxy a Stargate and make a lot of Void Rays. Just something that I come up with. And it's so far from optimized. And I'm playing top GM players and I'm beating them because they're so used to playing against the standard things. And sometimes people look at that and say, well, yeah, but I mean, look, you're bouncing around at 300 APM. You did all these cool counterattacks. And I'm like, yeah. But if you're not playing someone who's 6K MMR and you do some of this weird stuff, as long as there's any logic behind what you're doing at all, and like, you kind of execute it half decently, you're gonna massacre the ladder, because so many people just copy what pros do, and they get stuck in this mindset, like Ravi was saying, where I just need to do, I want to do what that pro does. And that's cool if that inspires you and it looks fun. But the number of players who like, then they see that pro lose to something and say, yeah, how do you beat this? This pro keeps losing to it, therefore I can't beat it. And it's like, damn, you can do any composition you want in this game and you can make it work up to high GM. Be kind of like be resourceful and just kind of be creative and have fun with it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just looking up a build and grinding it out. Like Troy, you were saying before, you want to mess around with battle cruisers. Well, you better refine your mid game build and get ahead, so then you can get to the battle cruiser stage. Like, that's not true at all. You can just rush to battle cruisers, teleport them into people's mineral lines. This is something Nathaniel stumbled upon when he was trolling on ladder, and he was like, oh, this is cool. And he loved it so much, he streamed basically mass battle cruiser every game for like 6 months. It's something where I feel like if everyone was a little bit more willing to be creative and just play messy, sloppy games, they would realize they're learning more as well, if they're using their head. But people get so egotistical about the game and so focused on just winning and just doing what they think is optimal. And like you guys are saying, that they sit there grinding in custom games and like memorizing mechanics before they even hop onto ladder. And I'm like, you're missing out on a lot of the fun, which is discovering the game naturally in your own way, being creative and just figuring out what works. For me, I think there's actually a ratio which is right for everyone. And it's, how do you enjoy the game? And I think there is like an improvement versus experimental or messing around ratio, right? And for me, it's like roughly 50-50 now. And I've realized that's my sweet spot. Like if I just mess around and do crazy builds, I feel a bit overwhelmed by the game after a while, because every game's different. There's no consistency. There's just so much crazy stuff happening. But I also don't like just improving and grinding the same build orders over and over again, because then the game feels stale. So for me, I like to do about half like crazy experimenting, trying new things, just freestyling, and half grinding out those builds that I already know and trying to play like the technically correct reactive macro game. I don't know. Do you guys feel like you have your own sort of ideal ratio between messing around and being creative and practicing, your legit builds?
Well, it's interesting that you sort of brought up the creativity word, because when you look at how we laud pro players, like you had TLO, he was lauded consistently as being incredibly creative and innovative. So we have these pros where when they express creativity, it's an incredible plus. But when you have the Gold League player posting on Reddit about the cannon rush that he did 25 minutes into the game, it's well, that's bad, and you would lose against a good player.
Not just the gold players on Reddit as well. It's like it's when the pro players play doesn't work as well. The number of people like, oh my god, what an idiot! That's so stupid. Why would you try that? Is really stupid. So I think it's like people are just so quick to jump on anything that isn't the established way of playing and saying you're an idiot if you do that and it doesn't work. And even if it does work, it's probably because your opponent screwed up. People are very quick to like rob the enjoyment or the feeling of success, even from pro players. Like Haas gets very little respect from most fans, very little. And he deserves a lot more because he's beating the best players in the world consistently with his crazy builds.
Back in, the early days of Starcraft, when, it was a live game, you had Day 9's Fun Day Monday. That was a big stream every Monday, which was, for better or worse, dicking around. And it was dicking around as the goal. You don't see a lot of that these days. A lot of what you see, high-level, high GM players or tournament streams focusing on high-level, esports level play. There's no real celebration of amateur play or of creative play.
Funny enough, I would actually disagree with that a little bit, but not necessarily in a general sense that I get from the community. I would agree with you in that. But actually looking at viewer numbers, I feel like there's, in the past, I would say year, I feel like we've seen a lot of the personality streamers come out in 2017 that have actually done pretty well for themselves.
Potentially a little bit, but I do agree with Troy that like historically in StarCraft, there has always been a very 1v1 focus. And it stems back to, esports was a big part of StarCraft 2's explosion, and that directly carried through from Brood War. And if we think about StarCraft 2, it is a scene which has been very centered around the personalities. And this is esports in general, but especially in StarCraft 2, we think about Day 9, we think about Tastosis, we think about In Control. I feel like everyone was super just like 1v1 esports focused, especially whenever there's, the esports game. The whole community and the whole kind of online chatter about it is really weird. People just get like so obsessed with the competitive. We've just been focused around 1v1. That's all we care about, 1v1 competition. We don't care about team games. Every stream, even the more entertaining streamers, very rarely interact with other streamers. They're just like, I'm just going to play my game and do my thing, 90% of the time. And it is something which is missing from the StarCraft scene in general. And whilst I also have noticed, as Ravi said, a lot of these other streamers coming up who are just kind of chilling out, having a good time. I remember just kind of watching a lot of different streams on Twitch, going through like when PUBG was getting popular. And I was like, the thing I'm enjoying the most is people just having fun playing their games. I like a bit of the 1v1 competitive stuff, but I want to see people just mucking around with their mates and screwing around and, like driving cars into each other and doing stuff. In StarCraft, there is a ton of stupid, silly plays you can do that are just hilarious, which we always forget. Like the number one example, right, is the fact that like spray paint came out like 2 years ago or something, and no one uses it. Like finally, a few people have started dropping spray paints on the ground just because like everyone's like, no, all I care about is my MMR and going up and finding the new build to win the next tournament or something. And it's like, guys, can we spam some spray paint? Can we throw some smack talk out? Can we get on and play some 2v2s and make some dumb jokes while we screw around and play 3v3s or 2v2s? And I've been trying to play a lot more 2v2s with Maynard. We've been having a ball. We've been playing like fun little show matches with like the base with Rifkin and Zombie Grub and stuff, and it's just added a much more fun dynamic, which for a long time was missing. And I was for a long time that pro player who did a bit of streaming, but was still like, even when I first swapped to streaming, was like, all I do is play 1v1, and all I care about is showing the builds that are the best and copying the pros. And it's a little bit empty. It's like, sometimes you just want to have fun and foster a community, and everything can't just be like, hey, win or lose. It's just about let's try and win every game, and that's all that matters. Sometimes it's about just dicking around with your friends and having a bit of fun.
Early Destiny streams, you had the 4-Fester hit squad, which was a successful meme. But even when Destiny played 1v1, there was Kyle. Like, that's a thing that
Kyle was
you don't get that with streams anymore. When you're playing a 1v1, it's you and you're just going hard at the opponent. There's never like the panel of commentators that you interact with while playing a 1v1. And I think we're worse off for it.
I agree. Actually, another good example, it was short-lived. I actually only remember it ever happening like twice, but I actually remember some of the funniest ladder games I have ever seen was when Day 9 hopped onto Skype with Eat Me JP when Eat Me JP was laddering.
Oh, God, yeah. I remember this.
Yeah, he was like, okay, you're going to make like 10 Void Rays and you're going to get a Mothership Core. Okay, now kill the hatchery. Now recall out. Now get out of there. Like, and it was just a bunch of memes and joking around and having a good time. And I agree. I think that is actually something that's hugely missing, not just in the streams, but I think it just encourages people to think about the game in a more lighthearted and fun way, like we keep talking about. And I'm actually really wondering, like, Pig has talked about, doing these kind of things with Maynard for these 2v2s. What can just the community as a whole do to try and encourage this kind of behavior? Not necessarily just for themselves, but encourage it more just on the overall of how people look at StarCraft. Because I totally agree. I think that a lot of the kind of perception of how StarCraft is viewed right now is, and how people come into the game really affects the way that they end up trying to do things later.
We got the game because we wanted to play the campaign. We wanted to see what happens next in the story. We wanted to play the game against our friends. We wanted to play team games with our friends. We didn't think, I'm going to grind 1v1 and get the best that I ever was, like no one was before. Like, I mean, in my 1v1, even like when Pig and I do our 2v2s, like he was talking about, we start our 2v2s, we get straight into the game. The only thing that's the same about our 2v2 games or any game of StarCraft is that you start with a command structure and 12 workers. That is the only thing that is exactly the same from one game to one game. Every game is different. And in our 2v2s, we'll go, all right, what's the game plan? And we've just started our first SCV probe or drone, and we're like, we've already decided. Pig's like, I'm going to go double Prism Archon drop. And I'm like, I'm going to go, I don't know, mass air units or whatever. And then we just try and push towards that. And that's our goal. Are we trying to win? No. Do we win? Sometimes. Does it matter? Absolutely not. Did we have fun? That's what matters. Simple as that.